Welcome to the Real People, Real Business Show. My name is Stephanie Hayes, and I'm a business strategist who loves to speak with like-minded entrepreneurs to share their real stories and the gritty details of building their businesses. On this show, you won't hear about the glamorized entrepreneurship journeys that you see online. You won't be told how to make six figures in 6 weeks. Instead, you can expect to hear real, vulnerable, and inspiring stories that you can relate to that have helped create the foundation for each of our guests' businesses. Goodbye, boss babes. Hello, real life entrepreneurs. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Josh Fuller. Josh is the founder and CEO of Matic Digital, a digital strategy and talent growth agency that surpassed $1.5 million in new business in 2021, its first year, despite a personal health bombshell, client payment delinquency of nearly $500,000, and post-COVID economic uncertainties. With just 4 full-time employees and about 50 independent contractors in Matic's stable, Josh has a lot to say about finding what drives you, trusting your gut, pivoting with resilience and humor, discovering and shaping talent, and defending the value of your work, your experience, your time, and your people. Welcome to the show, Josh, and thanks so much for taking the time to share your story today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
We've got a lot to talk about, clearly.
Yeah, that intro certainly brought a lot of memories back.
Yeah, I saw you twitching in the background there. So let's just jump right in. Tell me the story. How did Matic Digital become a thing? Where did it come from? What was the journey?
Yeah, so I've been in and around digital and creative in numerous roles for a couple of decades. Getting my start, there was the dot-com implosion and there was no jobs. So I started a company then, which I ran for 9 years. It paid bills and I learned a ton, but it's certainly nothing like what Matic has been able to do just in the first year. From there, I jumped into creative director as an agency and really got kind of boots on the ground exposure to bigger projects, bigger teams, bigger personalities. It was wonderful. And then I was fortunate enough to spend several years with Deloitte, doing, again, bigger teams, bigger projects, and moving on into some startups. So I kind of did the full spectrum. And in early 2021, found myself, probably like a lot of us after COVID, just the startup I was at was cool and it was great. But it was a slow process and COVID made things even slower. And I really missed shipping and missed seeing results of the work we were doing. And so ended up stepping out to do a little independent consulting and I guess figure it out, what was next. So I did not have a notion to start Matic or an agency at that point. I was fortunate enough to get a kind of creative consulting gig that was supposed to go 4 months. It lasted 6 and just realized pretty quickly I was having the most fun I had had in 10 years working in that capacity, direct with the client. A few other people heard I was independent, sort of having talks with them and helping out. So in September 21, I launched Matic Digital, and the journey's been really fun. I was pretty rusty when it came to all the things of running a company, from billing and taxes and getting clients again and sort of creating exposure and keeping teams happy. It was a lot of new knowledge from, I guess, working in the bigger fields, but being back to kind of a one-person army was a bit of a wake up. But we got through the first few months, which are always bumpy, and ended the year really optimistic going into 22. And so from there, I mean, it just started to scale. We had the idea of how do you keep talent busy when you're not, as an agency. Layoffs are very common. Didn't want to get into, the hire and fire spectrum of things. Just didn't feel like that was the right path. I don't think many companies do think that's the right path. So not necessarily special that I felt that way, but started thinking, well, there's a need for great talent. I've been in the field for over 2 decades and I've brushed shoulders with a lot of great people, but also I just kind of know how to, what I'm looking for or what kind of soft and hard skills I think would be good for client teams. Sent a few emails around, asked a few questions, and before we knew it, a client company that was forming had said, yeah, we need, maybe a designer. And you had mentioned having a few, available maybe. So can we meet them? So I sent them a few candidates to talk with, five. They met with all five. They engaged four for 3-month contract. And that's kind of the birth of Matic Teams, which was great. So we had the studio doing our agency work, but now we had 4 practitioners for these kind of long-term, dedicated, committed roles on client teams. We bolted them in, we supported them in the background through Slack and other communications tools, and just keeping, kind of fostering a team initiative, but they were very plugged in with the client directly, building that client's product. And over the course of a few months, the 4 turned into 12. We were filling well beyond creative. We were filling director of QA, a product lead, WordPress developers, Flutter developers. It just sort of scaled, and it was a really awesome journey of kind of seeing this thing come to life while still maintaining our agency and building our talent in. So, that was the start. I guess that was what really bolstered the two, was a little bit of agency experience and a little bit of luck with this idea of wanting to sustain, when we find great talent, keep them busy.
And so who are the clients that are engaging you?
So we have a handful of different types. Really, we work with some agencies, actually, some larger agencies. It's kind of a funny paradigm that we're able to partner in there. We understand the language, the challenges, and can help, them for the 3 or 6 or 8 month engagement, without needing to scale and downsize, as per typical with client dependent work. It's very difficult days with agencies in terms of the AOR model, agency of record model is somewhat deflating in popularity, and with companies building their own product teams, their own internal marketing teams, they really want to own that whole process. So agencies are still very much valued and necessary. It's just the adaptiveness is changing, and so that's a category we support quite often. Another category is developing, not quite like pre-seed groups, but startups that are maturing, startups that have recently closed a significant Series A or Series B and need to grow quickly, and would rather spend the dollars on shipping product than on building an HR team to find, vet, interview multiple times, to building out a team for different capacities. Coming to us, we can sort of quickly adapt as an agency to from a discovery model, we can sort of quickly adapt as an agency to their understanding their needs and their issues, but and their challenges and kind of their culture and the chemistry and where the gaps might be, and start to curate our talent against those gaps, and either pull from people we already have, or again, sometimes it's been a little more unique than the typical wheelhouse. We don't, we are a strategy and creative digital services company. We don't have a fleet of Flutter developers just, in the back office. So like there is some work we'll do to go out and actually find and do a tech screen and do testing and do all that. But we try and cut the time to hire from, a month to 2 months. We try and bring that down to a week to 2 weeks. And of course, again, offering that kind of, plug and play background if there is an issue on the soft skills, if there's a culture fit issue, a skill set issue, a need to scale, a more positive note, if they just need another member on their team, we can, really be responsive to that. And I guess the last category is we've haven't yet closed, but we've gotten through the contract process, which is actually quite the challenge. But we remain at the ready for a couple of larger, more Fortune 500 type brands that are just dealing with kind of looking for new ways to hire and new ways to scale and find specialists. One of the things when you're dealing with independent talent is there's a lot of people in there. We really strive for top talent. We strive for those that have intentionally chosen the path of choosing to work for 3 or 6 months because perhaps they want to take another 3 off and go on a road trip, or spend time in Europe and be unplugged, and versus a PTO type policy. So they'll bill a bit more, they'll work a bit harder, but when the engagement ends, they want that break. They might want to go back, or they, another benefit to top talent in their workforce, variety. It's very easy to fatigue. It's very easy to fatigue on certain page types that you're just revisiting and churning on, a lot of the data we find the design does need touches and does need updates, but the designers themselves maybe are just kind of fatigued of doing this same page with a slightly different header and a slightly different location for the form field. So bringing that freshness to the talent, and also the benefit of freshness and excitement to the clients, seems to be a really good match.
So having run a number of consulting companies, services, organizations, one of the things that we really wanted to build was we wanted to build a consulting agency just with top talent. And so everything you're speaking about right now is, kind of in the crosshairs of everything that we had been struggling with as well. Like how, not so much struggling, but like, how do you maintain this roster of super high-end consultants that will come and go? They like it because it's flexible, but you can't employ them. You can't hire them as full-time employees. And so what do you find is the key to keeping them engaged, keeping them around, and knowing that you can rely on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, I won't postures that we've figured that out entirely. We have not. Getting closer. I think one of the big light bulb moments that happened initially that has proven to be pretty relevant is the agency. We stay very, very sharp in this space. We are currently much, I would say, if you took a scale, the scale would lean heavier on studio engagements through the agency, so client work. So one way we keep people engaged is we solve all those problems just inherently by being an agency. Our work is variety driven. Our clients are across multiple spectrums, so the engagement asks are different on each one. So keeping that aspect of it, paying competitively, paying quick, is a huge value add that, predictable, forecastable revenue is important. Just choosing a life of independence doesn't mean choosing a life of, I don't know where my next check is, or it shouldn't mean that. So a couple of just, what I would call just no-brainer. You're a professional, we're a professional company. We want you to keep being with us. You just treat people really, really fair and honestly, right? So there is no special magic algorithm doing that. I think it's just trying to give people a sense of consistency, but it's not quite the Wild West where you're out on Upwork promoting yourself and cutting your price against the next person cutting their price. We also stay fairly focused in a nearshore market. So we have several Matic teams, practitioners up in your area in Canada, and then mostly the rest in the US. And there's a few thoughts on that. It's not so much about talent, because there is talent obviously all over the world. It's amazing talent. I'd love to tap into all of it, but it's time zone is really what it is. It just comes down to being able to work on time zones that make sense, being able to, if you're going to participate in a client team that's building a startup, working at a rapid pace on a sprint schedule, on an epics, deliverable model, you've got to be on the Slack when they are. You've got to be at the stand-ups when the stand-up is scheduled at 9 a.m. And we don't we don't allow for any room to where there's somebody's dialing in and it's 1 a.m. their time. Like that's, we keep everything very near shore for the logistics. So I think a couple of those things have just really helped give people a sense of, we're building something that can be a bit of an anchor. And 2023, there's a lot of big plans to mature on that model.
Oh, I want to hear more.
Yeah. It's sure right now.
Yeah, go for it. Let's hear it.
So a few of the key hires we just started to develop in January. We have a talent advisor coming on, where that role I see is, it's kind of like our answer to an HR team. Basically, because in lieu of having one, being as early as we are, we don't have an HR team other than myself and just, again, everybody having a shared kind of, be a professional, be a respectable kind of person to everybody we work with. But the talent advisor is really about fostering that relationship further, getting to know in the off days. Like, not everybody's working all the time. We have a lot of folks that, do find themselves on the bench, whether it's by choice, their engagement ended, we haven't teed a next one up yet. Whatever that case may be, it's just the reality of independent work as a whole and trying to harness it. So we want to be talking to our teams all the time. A lot of folks, nobody really to date has become a Matic Teams player, as I call it, like, kind of call them the players for the team. Nobody has done that without meeting with me, without chatting with me quite a bit. They have access to me on Slack and Cell and all the things, but I am one person. So growth means you gotta scale that. And also, I'm one person, I can't be everywhere all at once. And so something I haven't been able to do is that's on our vision, is building these vignettes, these features. Really, the talent we choose, there's eye-opening moments in their work or in their positioning or in their, plug and play skill set from, coming into fintech to a new fintech or health tech to another health tech. We want to really feature this in a way that's not always, through an email to a client in a very relevant, you asked for this, we have these 3 people to push in front of you. We want to push our people out in the world through all the channels we have at our disposal, and potentially eventually do things like this, do a podcast with them and really get to know. I'm very fascinated. I love my journey into design. I'm a nerd. I didn't think I was a nerd growing up. I can admit it now. But I saw The Matrix and bought a computer. Like, I was studying architecture and I saw the movie, bought a computer and started just playing with design. So, there's my admission of my nerdy background into the field. I did not go to school for this. I did not train in this, but yet I've done it for 2.5 years. I've owned 2 companies. I've been a part of acquisitions, startups that made it to acquisition. I've been with Deloitte, been very fortunate in my career. My path to it was very driven by this kind of passion and this idea of listening to music while I worked just sounded cool to me. It seemed very cool to me. And it was not on my trajectory before. So I want to hear other people's stories. And so we're building in some tools to really facilitate that. And I think it's those human stories that are really going to help, companies and organizations that are very used to a way of doing business. And a lot of times you've got 2 things. You've got, we don't deal with third parties, or we just went full time right now. And that's great. That is totally great. It's also, going up against kind of massive layoffs, quiet quitting, people having 2 or 3 jobs at one time. There's a lot of shifting plates happening in the space of just people in tech and what the future holds. I certainly don't have an 8 ball, but I do believe that what we're trying to build is there's another way, right? There's just another way. And it could be a best fit where it's not so much employee-employer, it's entity and entity coming together and doing awesome things. And so we're really trying to build on that experience through real tangible, small steps at a time, right? Again, so I'm very excited to have a talent advisor joining. That's a major step. And there's some other things that are a little less solidified that will be, probably not ready right now though.
Okay, well, we'll have to come back and check in on those. It's interesting. The early part of my career was in the .com. Like, I grew up in the .com era and literally in the thick of it, building and incubating companies. And I had this role that I should never have had in my early 20s, where it was fun and it was great and it really helped me grow. But I feel like we're in that sort of second wave. COVID really changed a lot about the way we think about work and what we're looking for from our work. And I see an agency almost like a B2B model, right? Where you are acquiring the services of another business, and that business happens to be an individual. But when you start to think about yourself as a business, then you start to make different decisions about where you get engaged. And I think at least in a fast-paced, nimble environment like we're in right now in tech and in the space that you're in, I think the freelance model makes a whole lot more sense than hiring employees. And I think what's really interesting about your business is that you're a digital agency, but your focus is almost more on the people and the resourcing talent side of it than on the actual work that's getting done. And I wonder if I think it's smart, because I think that your clients are probably engaging agencies now, less so on whether or not you can do the work, because you all can, and more so on how you engage. Do you think that's true?
I 100% think that's true. It's shared principles, empathy. I think organizations and brands and anybody out there on the hiring side, should be met with those principles. I definitely believe so. We have I think a kind of organically empathetic ear to just, it's not about what we can do, it's about, or even how. That's not usually the thing that we're selling at all. It's more the why, and like getting to that answer together. And there's been a lot of, I guess, growth in the space in terms of how do you get to a strategy? How do you define a set of KPIs that you're going to build against, bill against, and deliver against? And but I think a lot of times, somewhere along the way, the industry kind of stopped listening for a little while, and it was like, well, it was very prescriptive, like, oh, it's user first, it's 100% user first. Like, you're not user first, that's crazy. And that's, by the way, I share that sentiment to some extent, but that's not how to foster a relationship. Right. So I think the agencies that are going to win, and the ones that are going to continue to win are the ones that have just shown us, we listen, we don't, we listen to stakeholders, but we go out on the street, wherever that is. If you're, a coffee shop, stand outside and ask why somebody walked by. Now you're doing user interviews. It doesn't have to be a great veil and thousands of, billable hours tied against user research. User research is generally what you and I are doing right now. It's a conversation, and a focused one, but a conversation. And I think getting to that and really, being a partner that's like, look, you need a cool thing, we want to build a cool thing, let's go figure out what that cool thing is together. I think that's the kind of the shift in dynamic. And over the last few years, that's a big positive for the industry. Is we're not, again, there's no big reveal, magic curtains. We at Matic, we do weekly check-ins with clients, kind of wherever we're at. If there's a client need, or a certain client requires a certain reveal element, we certainly do that. If a lot of folks we're working with really like to be kind of in the trenches with us, and like, let's dig into the design file organically. We'll show you our top thinking, and then we'll kind of show you how far down the rabbit hole we went, and we'll kind of come out of it, with an alignment and move to the next benchmark. So that's how I like to work. I think it's a really fun way to do it, and it seems like it's being adopted a bit more and more every day.
Yeah, so design's a funny one for me, because I work with a lot of creative individuals, and have over the course of my career. And I think there's a tendency to want to be like, let me get it totally right first, and then I'll show it to you, client. And what my best friend is a designer, and she's like, what, forget that. She goes, we've been doing this for too long. She's, we're pushing 50, and we went through the .com era together. That's where we met. And she's like, what, I'm going to get a design to a client as quickly as possible, because where the real conversation starts to happen is when they have something to respond to, because trying to pull things out of the blue, and so I find that the creative world is starting to become a lot more pragmatic, and recognizing that marriage of a client's requirements. And it doesn't always have to be the most innovative design. It has to be design that works for the client. It has to fit the business, right?
Yes. Yes, I think there's only one, kind of caveat to that, maybe, or maybe it's just an addition to, is when you're talking with, I do this all the time. If somebody asks me about my problem or my goal, my North Star, whichever kind of either way you spin that question, I could get there. If somebody asks me that, I will inevitably, always my first instinct will be to start talking about the other agencies that I think are killing it, or that I would like to emulate, or that I would like to be more like. Competitive, I'll go straight to, in industry, and I'll keep my world really narrow. But when you start to think bigger than that, so we do a lot of that with clients now, is okay, if you're a consulting group, start thinking about car companies. Like, what are they doing? What ingenuities, what messaging, what small details or touches, like start thinking bigger than just your industry. Nike's a great inspiration to many, right? Especially in design, they're just amazing. So you take a Nike and you take a technology services group and you ask the tech group that's only looking at other tech groups in their sector. To date, they're like, oh my God, these guys are doing this and they're saying it this way and they're saying it this way. Well, let's go look and see how Nike has thought of ways to sell us shoes without talking about shoes. Let's go look. It's not like we need their budget to be inspired by their creativity and by their influence. And so, I think that's a fun way to get there. And I like, there was a time when it's like, hey, give me your problems, I'll give you your solution. And sometimes that there's a time for that, I think, but it's very rare. More often than not, it's kind of like, let's work together to get to make this wet clay start to look like something. And we should be taking inspiration from everywhere we can, to be quite honest. So yeah, I always encourage, don't look in your world you already have done that. You're an expert on your own competition. Let's look bigger. Let's look elsewhere and get our ideas and our hopes there. If a brand makes you resonate a certain way and you want to resonate that way to your customers, let's dissect that brand. Let's get to the why.
Well, having worked with Nike in their technology services group, what's really interesting about Nike that I see is how integrated their business is. And so we're working with the guys who are working on technology business management and super nerdy stuff. I've been a nerd since I was born. I'll totally fully admit that. But but they also spend a lot of time with the marketing group. They spend a lot of time with their creative talent, because everything is in some ways connected, right? And I think that's a really good point. And I think being an agency or a consulting group or someone who provides services, what I've loved about that role is that I get to work with so many different types of companies, from paper companies to international shipping to law enforcement and justice. And we get to see and we get to have that perspective, but I don't think our clients always do. And so we are supposed to be there as the catalysts to help bring that inspiration in, right?
100%, 100%. I'm a little jealous of your Nike. I came close when I was in Europe with Deloitte for a while. We had Adidas, and I got to pitch.
We worked with Adidas too, yeah.
Yeah, we had a couple of the cool shoe companies, but and we were just moving towards Under Armour when I came back to the States. But yeah, never got to do much creative. It was a lot more of the analytics and Tableau work.
Yeah, we didn't do any creative. We're all back end stuff. So what was the trigger? You didn't intend to start up an agency, and at some point in time it became that, and probably pretty quickly, right? What was that trigger where you said, you know what, this is a business?
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. That was the trigger. I think in the early 2000s when I started my first, it was desperation. I didn't know where the future was, but I had a couple years in it, loved design, didn't see myself doing anything else. I was still doing coding then too. I don't anymore. I'm the worst at coding. But this time around, I'm older. I've got a daughter. Probably most people did say you should definitely just go get that cushy job and enjoy that. And I often have thought maybe I should. And especially earlier in the summer with some life stuff, the health stuff that was happening. But to get back to your question, no, I'm thrilled that I didn't. I was having fun. That's it. People were coming around. I keep a pretty healthy LinkedIn. A few people in my world have said my biggest strength is I haven't worked with you in years, but we still get lunch because you reach out. And I don't know if that's like, you could stop bothering me for lunch now, or like truly but whatever it is, I'm really happy that that's like kind of just a natural instinct to like, oh, I loved working with them and I'm curious what they're up to these days and we should go catch up. And so I try and do that pretty often. And that's what I think how the word, kind of spread in kind of my smaller circle that, hey, yeah, I'm doing some things like on my own. And so, I didn't plan to in February start an agency, but yeah, it was very intentional around July, August of last year that I'm doing this. And in September we launched. And by launched, I mean, I had a new email and a website. There was no fanfare. I just, we launched, had a few clients we were working with and off to the races. And yeah, I think, and then like I told the story of Teams. I mean, that was really organic as well. It just, I had I having been through agency once with very little experience and just, again, I just like designing, so I'm going to do this, and never scaled very large, but had a lot of fun then too. The one thing I knew is it was, it's really hard to sustain when you're on a project by project life cycle with revenue. And so that's kind of, Teams was more really just a staff aug thought. And it turned into, I'll say this. So the client that we placed a lot of people at earlier this year, they were a big part of it. They were very complimentary. They after the first few people, they said, hey, these folks are great. They had been working with some recruiters and some other folks, and it weren't getting the type of results they were looking for in terms of capabilities and soft skills and everything from the people. And again, we were kind of, batting a pretty high average with them, with the people we were sending. And that's not me at all. That's those people. But they were like, no, you have a real skill for picking, like for selecting talent, for like knowing who would be a good fit where. Like it seemed to be something that we were shining at a little bit. And so I owe that to like 20-ish years of, we only put on people that we put on Matic projects, right? So the idea is kind of, the people that are in our wheelhouse, some sort of a very special type of skill set that's like not an everyday touch point. We don't always at Matic have like multiple Android applications being developed, but right now on Teams we have 2 Android developers working on projects for clients because they had an Android need. So some of that we didn't have just inherently at Matic, we went and found. But all the people kind of have at least one quality, which I guess is I want to work with them. That's that's it. I'd want to work with them, and they do good work, right? So
and if you listen, I mean, at this point in my life, I think we all get to this point where we're like, you know what, the business that we're going to grow, I think we have to go through our starter businesses, right? And I've certainly done that. I have one business that I've had for 12 years now, and it's still going strong. But we get to this point in terms of our own reinvention where I think that eventually our true nature comes back to us and we build based on that. And based on everything that you said to me today, it sounds like this strength that you have around people, like the LinkedIn and, just naturally prioritizing those relationships. I think it seems pretty natural that a big part of your business would evolve around people and understanding people and building upon people and being, people focused. So yes, you build a creative agency, but you build a creative agency that has this really interesting kind of, people component, resource component to it.
Yeah. And, just as I can never take a compliment. Thank you, by the way, for without adding a little humility to it. When 10 years in an industry, I only had one job for a little while before the .com fallout. So prior to that, I had never really had a design agency job. I started my little one that I ran for 9 years, from the '03 to basically 2012. And when I left it, it was because a bigger agency in Denver had said, hey, we're building kind of rebuilding our creative practice. We need a CD. And I'm very good friends with the CEO. So he kind of kept pushing on it. And didn't take much. It took a few weeks. And I said, you know what, this would be a good time to leap into a bigger job. So let's try that. And so I did. And I was like an untrained, outdoor cat that I needed to be housebroken, right? And in terms of conversations, in terms of blunt force, and that was at a smaller agency that was independent, and even there I noticed it. But when I really noticed it was Deloitte, was when I really had to sharpen up on people skills, and just there's a way to deliver. You can't some creatives, by the way, I've learned, will respond really well when the feedback is basically, well, look at it from a new way. It's like basically start over, right? Like some creatives would really responded well to that. Not all. There's different conversations. There's different levels of feedback. There's different levels of guidance and collaboration that people need to get there. And Deloitte really taught me that quite a bit. So yeah, thank you for noticing that. But I guess I wanted to caveat it with, maybe there was a time when that wasn't so the case. I was just more like, oh, it's not done.
Listen, that's to be expected, right? None of us came out of the womb being good consulting people, right? And we all need to work on it. I've always been a very direct communicator, and as a woman, that's not expected, especially in a very male-dominated industry. And so you have to find your way around this without giving up who you are. You mentioned that there were a couple of very unfortunate things that you had to deal with, and I'd love to hear a little bit more around your thinking as to how did you not crumble?
Oh, well, I do have a kid that really gets mad if I get lost and say, oh, we're not going, I can't find this place. She's like, don't be a quitter, daddy. So she said those things to me, and that hung in there. But yeah, this year was tricky. So in right around April, we were doing really well with Teams, so well that I wasn't all that worried. The agency was not getting quite the attention because Teams was just growing at a pretty good pace, largely due to one client. And unfortunately, they were having some funding management issues in terms of managing the funds they had already gotten. So they were overspending, and the first place that you start to cut is on your bills to smaller companies like us. So we had.
That's not a rule, by the way. That's just more what typically happens.
It's unfortunate. It's definitely not a rule. Please, nobody else ever do this again. But so they stopped. Basically, they kept needing people and engaging us on good faith, but their payments stopped arriving. And as much as some folks in that organization were great partners and friends to Matic, some at more the financial side of it didn't really care who Matic was or about our people. And so there was a point in time when I was using every credit card at my disposal to pay whoever I could with anything we could, because we were also very new into this business. We didn't have a big, reserve account set aside for this to happen, 5 months into the year. So it got pretty bleak. We eventually had to pause services. They had hired quite a few people at this point. They converted to full-time, which we're totally supportive of. We don't go out and headhunt, but if talent loves the company and the company loves the talent, I mean, we're not trying to stop destiny with Matic teams. Like, we'd prefer to keep all our people with us. But if that's what happens, that's a good thing as I see it. And there's a congratulations in order for that. So that did happen. And the ones that they didn't, we were kind of left holding the bill. And thankfully, through kind of, I would say, luck and a few people's good intentions that got involved later in the game, we did eventually get paid in August. So just cliffhanger over for that story. But simultaneously, while that's happening, in the trenches of not being paid, owing contractors, a pretty scary amount of money, in the first few months of this business that was doing this, and then started to kind of feel like maybe not as successful as it looked like it was going to be. I ended up getting sick. I was having kind of recurring stomach pain, and that eventually I called telemedicine, to where I was kind of rightly so called, why would you live with this, dummy? Go to the emergency room. And I'd probably been dealing with it for about 6 weeks. So I went, and sure enough, my gallbladder was full of gallstones and it needed to come out. And so they did an emergency removal, and so that part's all good, because you're thinking, okay, at least like the health thing is good. I know what's wrong. I know why I've been throwing up so much or whatever. And that turned into, I was home about a week feeling great, when I thought the gallbladder thing was the worst pain I'd ever felt. It wasn't. Out of nowhere, I mean, I'd had a client lunch and a couple of calls in the afternoon, and during the last call around 3 p.m., I noticed something was really starting to feel off. And by around 5, I couldn't breathe. I was feverish and sweating, and there was no driving me to the ER. I called 911. They got here in time, and it turned out a gallstone that didn't make it out with the gallbladder. It blocked my pancreal lining somewhere in the last week, pancreal tube, and triggered acute pancreatitis and esophagitis from all the filling up, and I don't know, like 4 other things. Anyways, it was crazy. I spent a week in the hospital. It was over Father's Day, which my daughter and her mom spent a lot of time being around and being really supportive. And but yeah, I spent a week there, and then I went and spent a week at my daughter's mom's house in the guest room, and it was a really interesting low point. And that was when we were really in it. And also during that week at her house was the time I needed to pause the services to kind of stop the figurative bleeding of money to the client that was so in default with us. So it was a really interesting period, and I was about 3 days out of the hospital when I had to essentially tell 5 people, there's 5 or 6 people at this point that were Matic teams working there. You've got to stop working now, and I don't have another thing for you. So it was like letting 5 people go, really good people, telling them you don't have a job right now and there's no revenue and I can't do anything about it because we can't get paid by this client. And but I did that from like one of the weakest points in my life, and like physically. So yeah, it was a really interesting time, and July was not much better. I was very contemplative on, am I just too old to be doing this company stuff? Like maybe I should just get that job and take care of my kid. And like, clearly I'm falling apart here. I'm in the hospital. And but right around the end of July, I gone back and forth. I had some conversations. It looked like maybe there were some good opportunities for sure. But all the advice was kind of the same from folks I appreciate, is like, if you're going to do Matic, you have to do it all in. Like, just, you got to be all in. And, knowing you have a backdrop is going to be a weakness on the hard days. And I did know I had a backdrop to land on, but I found encouragement in that. And I ended up, I started looking at, like, at this point, we'd done close to $1 million in revenue, not realizing half of it yet, but we had sold it and we had earned it. And I was like, I'm 6 months into this. We've done $1 million in revenue and I'm going to close it because one client's like late on paying us. So I kind of started looking at strategies and what do I need to do and what needs to happen to where we can get back to baseline with our contractors that are waiting for their money. And let's just assume we're never going to get paid by that client. What has to happen to make this thing work, and how long does that have to happen for? And so right around the last week of July, I said no to quitting and went back in on it. And little weaker, but motivated. And then I got acute pancreatitis again, because they had to take a stent out of my pancreas, which triggered it. So August 2nd, I'm back in the hospital, this time 3 days, only 3 days, and 3 days at my daughter's mom's again. It was like the same thing, but just a lot easier. I ended up going to New York a few days later, and I'll just say this as a close. It was the best part of my year, I think. And we had a couple of conversations with that client's new COO, who came in and heroed up for us and got us paid around August 11th. And I know this because I woke up in New York, I'd had client meetings, but earlier in the year bought tickets to see a concert there at Madison Square Garden, and woke up that day and the money had been deposited. And it was just an amazing, like, I'd already said goodbye to it in my head, and it came back and it solved quite a few problems and gave us the momentum we needed to turn this year into, the last 5 months have just been outstanding. The first quarter of next year is crazy. We've got a couple new folks joining. So I don't know. I guess it's, at least for me, I have no lesson to preach here, other than, like, if it's something you really want, like, yeah, take away the, trampoline floor. Just if you're going to fall, but just get back up. Right. And so that was my year.
In a nutshell, I mean, nothing, no big deal, right? My mom has just been through the same thing, gallstones and pancreatitis, and yeah, it was quite a journey. We're coming up on time, but I have one question that I ask all of my guests, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. What's the difference between what we hear out there in the business world and the online business world and everyone talking about business, and what's real?
Ooh. Well, that is a big question. What's real? I mean, so we're talking a lot, what's real is that no matter what you're building in technology, there's a user, there's humans. There's humans that wrote that code, there's humans using that code. That's real. I mean, it may not be the biggest answer, but it's a right answer in a lot of ways. It's easy to forget that in the business world of this trend or this emerging market, or we've got AI and Web3 and all these, and they're all great. And, like, companies should be using and leveraging all of them. But it does ultimately all kind of go back to, we're all just people.
I love that. That's a great answer. Nobody's answered that yet.
Oh,
You're the first.
really?
Well, nobody has provided that answer.
That answer.
But I think it's spoken from a true kind of creative services professional, right? Because at the end of the day, the work that I do in corporate isn't creative, but it's the same concept. At the end of the day, there are all these frameworks. I do a lot of DevOps stuff, and there's a lot of frameworks that we can follow. And those are easy, right? Those are easy to understand. But when you start talking about how those get implemented and executed in a really, like, meaningful way that's going to stick, it's the people that you have to understand. And I think this comes back to the theme and the focus and everything that you're about. It's really about the people.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So we're gonna finish up here just because we're coming up on time. Yeah. And can you let the listeners know how they can find you?
Absolutely. So Josh Fuller, I'm on LinkedIn, but also Matic Digital is our .com. So MATIC digital.com. And there's info out there about us, our work. Actually, not us as I don't have a bio on it, believe it or not. We just let the work kind of do the talking right now. And then there's a lot about teams as well, a lot of teams info out there. So yeah, check us out.
Awesome. We'll include all the show notes, all the links in the show notes, and so people can find you and check out all the work that you're doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. We're going to wrap it up. I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to chat with Josh today to hear more about his business and how it came to be, his experiences along the way, and what the future of the business entails, even though we didn't get all of the details. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Real People, Real Business Show, where we get the real entrepreneurial stories and journeys that you can relate to. Show notes, resources, and links from this episode are available on my website and social media platforms. And thank you again for joining us today. If you've enjoyed today's content, I would love for you to give us a review on whatever platform you're on, as this helps us share these genuine stories with an even bigger audience. Until next time, keep building, keep dreaming, and keep being real.